because of your work and your writing, I think a lot of people assume that they know what you were like as a child, what your childhood was like, as painful as it was. Do they really know what your childhood was like, what Maya was like as a child?
Well, they would have to, I think, have been violated, have been molested. And then had the person killed. I mean, the person who did the rape, in my case, was killed. And the police came to my maternal grandmother's house while I was on the floor playing a game with my brother.
And you were 8 years old.
I was 8. By that time, I was about 7 and a half. And the policeman told my grandmother, within my hearing, that the man had been found dead, and it seemed he'd been kicked to death. It so startled me. It traumatized me. I decided not to speak. Then my voice might just go out and kill people randomly. So I stopped speaking for 6 years.
You communicated with Bailey,
my brother,
with your brother, didn't you?
Occasionally.
Yes.
Occasionally. But he was my heart. I mean, I knew I loved him too much. It wouldn't hurt. I couldn't hurt him. My voice could not hurt him. But even with him, I was, oft times, months would go by, and I wouldn't speak. But some years passed, years and years. I wrote all the time. And
why? Why did you write?
Well, because I read. A black lady in my town took me to the library. It was a black school, high school. I mean, the school was from there was no kindergarten, 6th grade to the 10th or 11th. She took me there, took me to the library, and she said, I want you to read all the books in this place. Start at A, and I'll come back and see you when you get to BR. So I did. I read every book in the place. It seemed vast. I know now that just one of the libraries in my home has more books than that. But it seemed vast. I don't say I understood everything, but I read everything. And I found I loved poetry. And I loved the poetry in the church. I loved to hear, I still do, to hear black ministers speak in that imagery and that melodic, mellifluous cadence and rhythm. I'm still enchanted all these years later. So
you read all of those books?
I read everything, yes. And then Mrs. Flowers, her name was, had some contact with the white school. She didn't live in Stamps. She had a house in Stamps. She lived in Little Rock. But she would come about every 3 or 4 months to the village, and she would come up the road carrying arms of books. And she was so beautiful. She was very black, that beautiful color, that dusky brown black that looks, if you put your finger, it would peel. Oh, God. And she spoke like that. You know, the way old Southern black ladies, I'm an old Southern black lady. I don't speak like that. But like Dr. Dorothy Height. Oh, yes, my dear. Ooh. All the plums in her voice. Then she'd come up and she'd say, my dear, I have books for you. These are all for you. You may come and see me at tea time. And she'd make tea cookies and read to me. So I just read everything and wrote poetry, voluminous albums and journals. The worst poetry east of the Rockies. But I wrote it.
Is Miss Flowers the one who I read that she said that poetry is music for the voice?
She told me that.
So
That's
wonderful.
how she started me to reading again. At 12 and a half, when I was 12 and a half, I had a little tablet, which, like a penny tablet, a nickel tablet. And my grandmother took her pocket knife, she called it, and made a groove in a number 2 pencil, tied a string into that groove, and another string into the spindle of the tablet. So I communicated totally with this I just wrote. So Mrs. Flowers had me at her house, and she had made tea cookies about that big, and the house was redolent with the aroma of vanilla and little cinnamon or mace. And she said, "You do not like poetry?" "Oh, my dear, no, you do not. You will never love it." I wrote, "Yes, ma'am, I do." She wouldn't look at my tablet. First time in 5 years almost. She said, "You will never like it. No, you will never, until you feel it come across your tongue, through your teeth, over your lips. You will never love poetry." Ah, I thought she was taking my dearest friend. So I ran from her. And my grandmother owned the only black-owned store in the town. So Mrs. Flowers had to come there from time to time. She'd come down. She and my grandmother are contemporaries. And she would point at me in front of Mama. Now, that's really bad manners to point at a person. You know, black people say, "Don't put your finger in my face." I can take many things, but don't. She pointed at me in front of Mama. Who I thought was God, really. She said, "You'll never like it. Never, 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 no." She harassed me for about 6 months. And finally, I went under the house to see if I could sustain, because even talking to Bailey, I would just say something, little bitty things. I had voice. I had left my voice. My voice hadn't left me. Oh. To hear it, not to make it up in my head. I was making up the sound. I thought this is how it would sound. But then to say, I know what the caged bird feels, me, when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, when the wind blows soft through the springing grass and the river floats like a sheet of glass, when the first bird sings and the first bud opes, and the faint perfume from its chalice steals. I know what the caged bird feels. To hear it, my lands, oh my goodness.
And that brought you back.
I continued, yes, to speak. And Bailey helped a lot. And a year or so later, I went back to California to live with my mother, with our mother. And she knew, too, that it was dangerous for me to become silent. That's still so all these years later, 60-odd years later. It is still so. If I'm really shaken, I stop speaking. And I then bring myself out. I sing, I speak loudly and firmly, and recite Poe and Shakespeare and James Weldon Johnson and all, and do it. Because mutism is like a drug. It's so addictive. You don't have to do anything. The book is called Gather Together in My Name. And in it, I had written about a very rough time at 18. I had Cage Bird, which was a national bestseller, and the first book of poetry, Cool Drink of Water, was nominated for the Pulitzer. And I went on to a national show, and the woman who interviewed me, who I knew slightly, said, Maya Angelou, how does it feel to know you're the first black woman to have a national bestseller, nonfiction, and second book nominated for the Pulitzer, and to know that at 18 you were a prostitute? It was like a kick in the stomach. However, there is this. You must always be careful of who you call out. You must be. When she said that, I said, but there are many ways to prostitute oneself, and you know a lot about that, don't you, dear? Whereupon they went to break. Yes. Whereupon her co-host came and concluded the interview. But I said, I have noticed that so many parents tell their children, either implicitly or explicitly, that they've never done anything wrong. Oh, my goodness, if I had done that, my daddy would have killed me. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. That would hurt the family. So the young person thinks, oh, my goodness, I must be the lowest thing in the world. Because not only do I do that, I want to do it. So I wrote the book, Gather Together in My Name, to tell young people who've been told that their parents have no skeletons in the closet. In fact, they have no closets. That I would admit where I've been. And they could see that. And they can realize that you may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. It may even be necessary to encounter the defeats so you can know who you are, how you can rely upon yourself, where you can pull yourself up from. So I had written the book just before I sent it off to the publisher. I called my mother, my brother, and my son. My husband had said, write it. I said, people will hate me. He said, write it. If it's true, a number of young black women and black men, and white men and white women, young Asian men, Spanish-speaking, have tried to reach an exit and found the doors not only locked, but no doorknobs on the doors. And they have done many things. It's important that you write it. So I called the family, and I said, there's this section you must know. If it's too painful, I'll take it out. But let me tell you why I want to write it. My mom, as soon as I finished this section, stood up and said, is it ready for the post office? I'll take it myself. And my brother, who is my heart, and said, you never have been a liar. I love you for it. But of course, my heart was my son. He was 20. He got up from the floor and came and sat beside me and took me in his arms. He said, you're great, Mother. You are great. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
That had to be an unbelievably magical moment.
Magical,
for you.
absolutely.
Yes.
But on the book tour, I stopped in Cleveland, Ohio. When that book came out, department stores still had book departments in them. So I stopped there to sign books. And I was signing, the line was long, and your name, and suddenly I looked, and there were two hands, black, with false fingernails, young hands. And I followed the hands up, and there was false hair, lots of it, and to a young face, about 18, false eyelashes. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. She's a young street prostitute. She leaned over. She had heard me on television. She leaned over. She said, "You give me hope." Now, if no one else said anything to me ever, it's sufficient.
Dr. Angelou's mother, Vivian Baxter, or Lady as she affectionately called her, personified courage, passion, a vivacious spirit, and a steel will. Maya has said to describe my mother would be to write about a hurricane in its perfect power.
The greatest story of all the stories I've heard in this book and heard you tell about your mother over the years, and I had the pleasure and honor of meeting Miss Vivian Baxter myself and seeing her at your house. But the greatest story is when you were, I don't remember how old you were, when you were working and you'd gotten off of work and the guy picks you up at work. Yeah, tell that story.
And the man who was a loving man and loving romantically as well, picked me up and drove me out to an area in San Francisco called Half Moon Bay.
Half Moon Bay.
He asked me to get out of the car. I got out of the car.
You'd been dating him for a while.
Yes, and he was really wonderful, I thought. And when I walked around the car I thought we were at a romantic place out by the bay and so forth. And he hit me with his fist.
Whoa.
And he had been a prize fighter. He hit me, he beat me. And sometimes I'd go unconscious and I'd come to and look at him, and he had a big plank and hit me, and I'd go out again. The next thing I knew, I was in the back of his car, and he drove to a restaurant in San Francisco at that time called Betty Lou's Chicken Shack. And he pulled up there and he called the men over and showed them. He said, "This is what you do to a bee who is cheating on you." And the people looked and they went back in and told Miss Betty Lou, "This man has your friend's daughter in the back of his car. I think she's dead." Miss Betty Lou called my mother, and my mother went to her pool hall and she got two of the
Because she owned the pool hall, right?
She owned the pool hall.
Yeah.
She went there and got the baddest, the most scarred up people she could find. She said, "I want you to come with me." And she found where the man lived. And she knocked at the door. Now, meanwhile,
how long were you there? That's what I couldn't tell from
about 2 or 3 days.
You were he like held you captive.
Yes. The next thing I heard was loud shouting in the hall. And my mother said, "Break this SOB down, break it down, my baby's in there." And the two huge men broke down the door.
So she rescued you. This is
Yes.
what I love about the story. Your mother comes through the door, she breaks through the door. After 3 days, she rescues
Yes.
you, nurses you back to health,
Yes.
takes care of you.
Yes.
And then one day says, "Go get him. This is where he is."
And she had friends who knew him and she'd put the word out on him.
I wouldn't mess with Vivian Baxter.
No,
you
never.
Do not mess with her.
She wasn't playing.
She wasn't playing.
She said, "I laugh and joke, but I don't play."
You've written a new book.
I know it.
Mom and Me and Mom. And we're going to talk a lot about that today because I know what Vivian Baxter meant in your life.
Yes.
And you say that your mother's love encouraged you to live your life
Yes.
with pizzazz.
Yes.
Would you say that you've had a life filled with pizzazz?
Yes, I have.
You have such a long list of achievements as we were compiling them. You were the first Black streetcar conductor in the city of San Francisco.
I was 16.
You were 16.
Yes, I was Black, 16, and had the nerve to want. I saw women on the streetcars with their little changer belts, with, that, and they had caps with bills on them, and they had form-fitting jackets.
You liked the uniform.
I loved the uniforms. So I said, "That's the job I want." And
They'd never hired a Black person?
they had never, no.
So did you see that as the accomplishment that it was at the time?
No, my mother did. Because I said, I went down to place an application and they wouldn't even give it to me. And so I went back to my mother and I said, they wouldn't even allow me to apply. She asked me why. "Do you know why?" I said, "Yes, because I'm a Negro." She said, "Yes, but do you want the job?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Go get it. Here, I give you money Every day you go down, be there before the secretaries get there. You sit there in the office. You read one of your big, thick Russian books. I was reading Dostoevsky or Tolstoy or something at the time. She said, and then when they go to lunch, then you go. Go to a good restaurant. You know how to order good food. Go back before the secretaries get there. I did all of and then sit there until they leave. They laughed at me. They pushed out their lips and used some negative racial things. But I sat there after.
At 16?
Yes, but look at here. Here was the thing. I sat there because I was afraid to go home. I was afraid to tell my mother that I wasn't as strong as she thought I was.
Wow.
So I sat there for 2 weeks, every day. And then after 2 weeks, a man came out of his office. He said, come in. And he asked me, why do you want the job? I said, I like the uniforms. And I said, and I like people. And so I got the job. Amazing.
What's amazing is the story that you tell in Mom and Me of your mother knowing that you were a 16-year-old on the streetcars and that she followed you in her.
That's
you
right.
tell the story.
About 4 o'clock in the morning, she'd wake me up with my bath already drawn. I'd take a bath, put on my uniform, and she would drive me out to the beach. And she had her pistol on the seat of the car. And she would follow the streetcar all the way from the beach down to the ferry building, right through San Francisco, and back again out to the beach until daybreak. I mean, stay close so that nobody got on that she didn't see. And then at 6:30 or 7,
that's a mother.
She's a mother.
That's a mother.
She was really all of that. And she asked me once, she said, now, what did you learn from that job? Because when it was time for me to go back to school, I went back to school. I said, I learned that I like to work. She said, what else did you learn? I said, I don't know. She said, about yourself. You learn that you're very strong. The determination,
wow,
dedication, and you can go anywhere in the world.